Well, it is an honor to welcome the Notre Dame Vice President and Director of Athletics, and Jack Swarbrick. And Jack, after the Big Ten and the Pac-12 shut down, there was a national narrative that Notre Dame saved college football. So how did you do it?
Well, we didn't, but I love the narrative, right? It's always good to have people say good things about you. We were just part of a larger process that effectively just said at that point, there's no reason to stop now. We may stop down the road, but let's continue forward. Let's gather data. Let's see what our experience is, and be informed by that. And our experience has been good. We've had about 1,200 tests of our football team since June. We've had 12 positives. That's a 1% positive test rate, and so we feel very, very comfortable moving forward.
And it was the week of August 11th when both of those conferences decided to shut it down. How did that week unfold from your perspective?
Well, in advance of their decisions, the teams we were playing in those conferences called, being the good partners they are, and said, look, I think this is what's going to happen this week. So Barry Alvarez from Wisconsin, Mike Bond from USC, Bernard Muir from Stanford. And so we had a pretty good sense that that's where it was headed. And, I think you then spend a lot of time talking to your colleagues at other schools. What are you thinking about? And we did play a little bit of a role in trying to say we don't have to, that's not a signal that we have to do something tomorrow. Let's take our time and think about it.
What do you think made them pull the plug? What specifically was it that made them go that you can't have football season this year?
Yeah, I think some of it was local differences. I think I don't want to speak for anybody, but certainly the challenges that were going on in Arizona and California at the time, I would assume played a role. The Big Ten talked about the level of uncertainty that surrounded the virus. Mm-hmm. And I think that's absolutely right. And it's a little bit about how you resolve that uncertainty, how you think about it. There's a narrative out there that people ignored medical advice or there was a fundamental difference in that medical counsel. That's just not true. I mean, we all were receiving versions of the same information. It identified uncertainties, and it was a little bit about how you react to those uncertainties. And it's reasonable. People drew different conclusions about whether to go back to school. So it makes sense that they might draw different conclusions about whether to participate in athletics.
Was there a moment where Notre Dame ever got close to coming to the same decision to postpone or to shut down football? What was the closest you ever came to that?
That was probably when we had the spike on campus. Yeah. So much of our decision, as you know, at this place relates to the larger campus dynamic. We're not sitting by ourselves on the side making uniquely athletic decisions. And so when Father John decided in May to come back to school in August, that was a signal for us to prepare to play sports. And then when we had the spike on campus, once we came back and he suspended classes, that was a moment for us to say, well, we got to see how the school does.
And I've heard you mention a handful of times now the data. You've been looking at a lot of data as you made this decision. What specific piece of data made you the most confident that we could get this season underway?
Well, the first and foremost was the performance of our own team. Could they manage it? Could they handle the expectations? Could they conform their own activities to keep themselves safe? And that data has been pretty spectacular for us, and could not be more proud of the guys on the team. But you're also looking at everything that sort of surrounds you. I mean, we would never want to be in a position where our need for testing used up a resource that St. Joe County needed or the broader university needed. And so you had to understand that dynamic. And the evolving science around it, especially as the heart issues arose, we spent a lot of time trying to understand those issues and making sure we were informed and that we weren't creating some unique risk for our students.
Well, help us understand then with the myocarditis stuff, because we saw the Penn State report and then we heard the Penn State report that it wasn't true. So now it's just all kinds of mixed signals with regard to that. What information do you have What's real, and how did that factor into your final call?
It's dangerous for me to get into medical science here, of course, but the things that were most impactful for me was an understanding that this is not some new risk. This attaches to viruses of these natures and has for as long as these viruses have been around. We have seen it. We have dealt with it. We've treated it. And so we had our own history with it. And we engage in testing for heart issues as a routine matter. And if someone tests positive, there's a whole range of heart-related tests we run to test for myocarditis. So there was a level of familiarity with it. It first appeared to me as something unique or new. And as I talked to our doctors and others, I came to understand it's a byproduct of viruses of this nature generally. So what that really focused me on was the risk still remains the risk of whether you're going to get COVID-19. I mean, that's still what we should be focused on. And there are all sorts of potential consequences of that, heart-related issues being one of them, but we got to go back and focus on that risk. And can we manage that risk? And as the ACC developed testing protocols, as we looked at our own experience, I became more and more comfortable that our students, frankly, who were engaged in athletics were probably as safe as any students in the country.
Mm-hmm. Who did you really lean on? Which doctor specifically were you on a text basis with, or a daily calling basis that you really trusted with this final decision?
We have a physician here on campus, Matt Lisler, just phenomenal. And Dr. Lisler played football at Harvard. So he has an athlete's perspective, but he's represented the university externally. So he's on the medical advisory group of the ACC. He's wired into physicians around the country at other schools. And so he's been our go-to resource. And I must say that ACC advisory group, sort of a lead physician from every school, all 15 of them working together, was really critical for us, because that's where we'd feed our questions. That's where the policies came from. And given the quality of those schools and some of those med centers, to have those physicians available to us was a real resource.
And I heard that Notre Dame had a data analytics professor that designed the seating chart for Notre Dame Stadium. Is there truth to that? And then how does the organization of the seating chart come together?
Yeah, it's been a really fun experience. Scott Nessler in the Mendoza College of Business decided that he wanted to help us out, and we're awfully fortunate that he did, because it's a dynamic you never have on a seating chart. I mean, there are all kinds of software applications that will help you seat an arena and feed you the best available seat, but they weren't built to put in social distancing limitations. So if you're trying to maintain 6 feet around each person, but you're trying to let members of a family unit or dorm mates, residence hall mates, sit together, that's an interesting series of factors. So the social distance around a person sitting as a single, the social distance around 4 people in a family sitting together is all different. And the challenge of then seating the place becomes very hard. Well, he developed a software system which let us feed in those variables and seat the arena or the stadium. Yeah. And it's been an enormous resource to us.
So essentially, if you live with somebody, you can sit with that group of people. And do they enter the stadium? How are we going to enter and exit the stadium? Slowly, carefully? Is there some strategy to that, or how do you think through it?
Yeah, we're going to, it's a maximum of 15,000 people entering into that big stadium. So I'm not terribly worried about the queuing or the leaving the stadium. But we'll suggest to you times to enter, and we'll have a pretty big window for you to come in. The roommates don't have to come together. They each have to have their ID. And we're going to encourage in every way we can our students to stay in the seats we assign to them to keep that social distance. But, we know we can only have limited success with that, right, Jack?
Amen to that. And you've always had to have the student ID card, so there's really nothing new there. Anybody that's ever been to a game. But as we know, inside of the stadium is always one thing, but historically, there has been one hell of a party out in the parking lot too. So how do you try to mitigate or slow down the pre-games, the tailgates, everything that's such a great part of Notre Dame game day?
Yeah, it's not going to happen, and I'm very confident we can control that. I mean, first of all, the audience we have, we're limited to students, faculty, and staff, and so none of those populations are the ones that traditionally set up in the parking lot for the tailgate. Students that go join those when their parents or somebody else had them. But so the people who normally engage in that, unfortunately, can't be with us this year. But we'll patrol the parking lot, and if you take a table out of the back of your car, we're going to ask you to put it back in. We're very, very committed to not having any tailgating.
Yeah. One of the things that I really thought was brilliant, I got in a little argument with Austin, Austin Collinsworth, my brother, well, and he was like, why are they coming back a couple of weeks early? It seems like you're just going to start a wildfire. I was like, but it also gives you a chance to try to get it under control, which wound up being exactly how it played out. What was your thought process? Who came to the decision with you that it's probably a good idea to get everybody back and give ourselves a little time here?
Yeah, this was all Father John, our new provost, Marilyn Miranda, and the medical experts that they were relying on, especially Dr. Fox, the local health official who's been such a great resource. And so I was downstream from that decision, but completely supported it for exactly the reason you said. I mean, you knew that dynamic was going to happen on virtually every campus in America. The students would come back, having been pent up for 5 months. There'd be a period of more social activity than you'd like, and you're going to get a spike. It's about how you manage that spike. I think Notre Dame has managed that spike brilliantly, and I can say that because it's not my job. Other people have done it. But I think we had 3 positive tests on campus yesterday. So we managed our way through that. But if you hadn't started earlier, it's coming on top of trying to play football, for example. That would have made it much harder. So really, really pleased with how it worked out. The SEC chose to start football later, and they get the same benefit, right? So Alabama, South Carolina, they're going through that spike now and trying to navigate it. But because the SEC started the season later, they got a shot to manage it.
So how much do you think the initial rise in cases was a result of classes? And how much do you think it was just the pent-up demand you described of college kids finally getting back around their friends? Like, what may be different about starting classes up a second time now?
Yeah, I think it was not about classes. There's probably some dynamic from the dorm, from the residence halls, as you well know. We're a residential education community. The vast majority of our students live in residence halls. So despite everybody's best efforts, you probably had some transmission through that, and a lot of it from social activities. The students here probably had an optimism about their ability to manage that was a little unfounded. But once they had the evidence and understood the risk, they can form their behavior. And it's been great to see. The other benefit of starting early, Jack, is this is like going to school on the West Coast now. It's warm weather, right? I mean, your first 2 months in school are ideal weather. It's great. So you can be outside, which helps a lot.
Yeah, probably a good time to invest in some fans, depending on the air conditioning situation, as we all know, as we've all lived through. Is there a possible scenario? This is such a week-to-week situation. It's so ever-evolving, and you never know what's going to happen next. Is there a possible scenario where football could continue in a bubble, even if students, maybe were sent home for online classes or full-time online classes, whatever the case may be?
Yeah, I'm so optimistic about where we are right now as a university that fortunately I don't think I have to worry about that. I think we're in really good shape, and so we'll be able to move forward. And frankly, even if we had a problem, I wouldn't think the university would send everybody home. It might look more like, some universities have brought juniors and seniors back, or freshmen and seniors, or have different strategies like that. So I don't think we'll be in that position, but we sure prefer to given our model of a student athlete, we sure prefer to play when the students are on campus.
And once you decide to play, who do you first talk to about joining the ACC? Who do you first pick up the phone? Was there a possibility ever that you may be in a different conference, or what was that process behind the scenes?
Yeah. Commissioner Swafford and I have worked together for 12 years now on the college football playoff, BCS before then. So we have a strong relationship. And then, of course, our other sports are in the conference. So it was just a series of telephone calls between he and I, very collegial, very easy. The choice we had to make was whether to build our own schedule, knowing that we were losing USC, Stanford, and Wisconsin, or to join the ACC for a year in football. The risk in building our own schedule, and there was a period of time there, about a month or 6 weeks, where everybody in the country was calling and asking if we wanted to play them. The risk was that their conferences would go all conference, and then we'd lose those games too. So there was a public report about Alabama and us playing. We absolutely had that conversation, but turns out, pretty fortunately, we didn't do that because the SEC went all conference a few weeks later. And so because we couldn't control that risk, I wasn't comfortable building our own schedule, replacing those games with games with opponents from the Big 12 or the SEC. And the ACC option was clearly the best one.
So how do you actually design game by game a football schedule? How do you decide that you want to play this team here and that team there? Is that up to you? Is that a conversation? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, it is up to me. Coach Kelly's great. Coach Kelly's perspective is you schedule them, I'll play them. And so he has not chosen to be very engaged in that. Ron Paulus, who's our administrator for football, is the key person. He makes all the calls and talks to the schools. But it's an unbelievable Rubik's Cube. I mean, I can't tell you. Every time you think you have it put together, something happens and you have to go back and start all over. We're scheduling into the 30s right now and trying to make that all work because, as you know, we're trying to achieve a number of things. We're trying to stay national. So we always want to be on the West Coast and the East Coast every year. We like the opportunity to go to special venues like Fenway Park or Yankee Stadium. We were supposed to play in Lambeau this year. And so how do you mix some of those in? We have an obligation to NBC to deliver a certain number of games. That matrix, we have an obligation to the ACC to play 5 games a year. That matrix gets really complicated as you try and build it out. The easy part, because we're scheduling so far out, is that Coach Kelly and I say yes to anything right now. You know, you want to play the Green Bay Packers in 33? Sure.
That sounds pretty good.
Yeah, let's go.
I love it. You're one of my favorite guys to talk football with, so I want to get a little bit of football in with you. So I was thinking back to the 4-8 season of 2016, right? And I can remember fans, alumni, just some group of morons, whoever they were, that paid for the ad in the school newspaper coming after Coach Kelly's job, your job, my job, anybody's job that they could think of. And since then, it has been 3 years with 10-plus wins all in a row. So what in your gut back then made you double down on Brian Kelly as head coach?
Well, the first thing is, as you know, I'm around the team a lot. I mean, the fans get to see game day and a bad series of game days that year, but I'm at practice. I'm around the building. That's when I'm evaluating coaches. You can't evaluate a coach on game day. You evaluate him in practice, and that's true of all our sports. Yep. And so I knew what I was seeing. I knew we didn't have a broken program. We had issues. We had some staffing issues we had to address. We had some issues of approach, but the underlying program was still solid. But I never will forget the counsel I received from Father Jenkins when I was working through this, and he said, you know, it's not like Brian forgot how to coach. He said 25 years of unqualified success. So we know he can coach, and that's right. I mean, that was the correct base observation that, okay, we got to be good partners here and figure out together how to fix the things that have to be fixed. And I was so impressed when I sat down with him, as we do at the end of every year to review the program, where his commitment at the start of that meeting to look at everything. He said, there's nothing off the table here. And when you know that you got a coach who's willing to do that, your confidence level that you can get a fix goes up.
And what pillars of the program did you guys really emphasize, hone in on from 16 to today? What has really gotten better, changed in that period of time?
Well, it revolves around the culture first and foremost.
Yeah, you can tell. You can tell.
Greater clarity about who we are, what we're doing, but how you implement that culture. As you know, college is different in that the person who spends the most time with the student athletes or the people are the strength conditioning staff. Because the NCAA limits the time coaches can spend with the student athletes, but they're with the strength conditioning staff a lot. So the culture set by the head coach has to be articulated and reinforced in the strength conditioning area. Mm-hmm. And so building that culture there, Matt Bayless came in and has really helped us with that. And that's a big part of the cultural difference. Making sure that message is being carried by the trainers and the nutritionists and everybody else who touches the student athletes. Making some staff decisions designed to get the culture exactly what we wanted. We needed a different relationship between the players and the staff. And the players told us that. Brian met with every single player at the end of the year and said, what do we have to do to get better? And the message was really clear about engagement with the players and the culture that needed to be established. And I got to tell you, the culture right now is so strong with this program. We could pick 16 guys as captains this year. It is in a really good place.
It's amazing because when you talk to the players, like you're saying, that's where you hear that new message from first, is how much they love going to work and being a part of the program. And that's what's so important. And on the field, you have seen some awesome offensive lines roll through Notre Dame, players, but also units. How does this 2020 offensive line compare to some of the best you've ever seen?
Yeah, we'll find out, of course. It's not fair to compare him to one that's got McGlinchey and Q and Ronnie Stanley all lining up together. But this is a really good line with a lot of experience. Every one of these guys can continue to play professionally if they choose to. They have that level of talent, but they're really committed too. Offensive linemen, they move around campus like an amoeba. They're all a group. They're inseparable. And this group certainly has that dynamic, but boy, are they committed to having a really good year. The way they work, the way they communicate with each other. I'm not going to compare them to others, but there's a lot of talent and the right level of commitment.
Yeah, and we both know that championships will remain the standard at Notre Dame, as it should. And we're getting a lot closer now. What do you think is still needed within this program to go from making the playoff, consistently being in that conversation as we are right now, to winning it?
I think building on the success. You're always trying to bring the best talent you can to a program, and there will always be an outsized focus on recruiting. It's what people love to talk about 8 months a year. Yeah. But for us, it's much more about fit. If we can find talented people, but people who fit here, who understand this place and want to be here for the right reasons, we can build a consistent championship contender. And that's the goal for us, is continue to make the progress we're making culturally, increase the talent where we can do it. But, look at the number of people playing key roles in the NFL from this program in the past 6 years. Look at the number of them who have a C on their jersey in the NFL. We're producing a high level of talent. We can always get better in that regard, but for us, we suffer a bigger cost when we miss on fit, because we're not bringing in a transfer. We're not, if you miss on somebody, you carry that miss for a couple of years, and we never miss athletically. We miss on fit sometimes, and we pay a price for that other schools don't necessarily pay. So we need to continue to focus on fit, talented young men who fit well, because they'll stay here, they'll develop here, and in their third and fourth years, they'll be championship caliber players.
Well, Jack, going all the way back to March, you really have personified to me what a leader should be in difficult circumstances. Been diligent, detailed, and you made Notre Dame proud every step of the way. So we appreciate everything you've done. Jack Swarbrick, thank you for your time today, too.
Hey, thanks for having me. I look forward to seeing you in person with masks on, but in person.
Amen to that.
Thanks, Jack.